It's Jazz on FM 88.5 KSBR. Esmeralda Olamendi here with the wonderful Michael Franks. He will be performing at the Long Beach Jazz Festival this Saturday, August 13th. Well, welcome. Thank you for taking your time to speak with KSBR today.
My pleasure.
So typically, artists do have a background of, either family that did influence them in their music career, but your story was a little different. Where did your interest in music begin?
I think it really just started as an avid listener. I happened to have, I guess, some kind of natural ability, and I started teaching myself things that I admired. I think for somebody I never studied music formally. I'm completely self-taught, and it was a great way to begin in high school, listening to the blues and trying to figure out how to play them, and there's kind of a formula for the blues which which is much more complicated in jazz music and jazz compositions, and so it's a good way, I think, to start, particularly if you have no musical education. When I was in high school, I was in a couple of little bands, and by the time I got to the university, I got a little more sophisticated. I started sort of with the blues and eventually kind of evolved into more of a jazz mentality.
Okay, then when did you begin to take that into education setting?
Well, I spent a lot of time at the university. I got out of graduate school, and I couldn't really get a full-time job anywhere. It so happened that particular time there were a lot of candidates for gigs, and I got a part-time job at UCLA, which was where I had been an undergraduate. And I taught a class for the extension there. And eventually I taught it up at the Berkeley Extension, too. And it was interesting because it was about the history of popular song in America, but I'm sure I learned more, than my students did, because it was so much fun to do the research, and preparing for the classes.
And at that time, were you also producing your music as well as creating music for motion pictures?
I did write some music, and I got a few tunes recorded by some old blues legends whom I had always admired and whose careers I had followed. Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee, these rural blues guys, and they recorded a few of my tunes, and and then I made a record. I made a record before I signed to Warner Brothers. I made a record, and everybody at Warner Brothers was aware of that. It had some great, LA session players, Tom Scott and Max Bennett, and just all the sort of happening players at the time. And so that was a nice way to sort of demonstrate whatever it was I was trying to do at the time, I guess, to Warner Brothers. I did score a picture at Warner Brothers before I actually signed as a recording artist. It was kind of an unlikely Western with a nice picture, though, with Gene Hackman and Lee Woolman, and I wrote some music for that, too.
Here is a familiar one from Michael Franks. Here's Popsicle Toes, FM 88.5 KSBR. Music from Michael Franks on Jazz FM 88.5. He will be performing this Saturday. Michael, is this your first time performing at the Long Beach Jazz Festival?
No, I think this might be my fourth or fifth time. Yeah, Al Williams has been so kind to us over the years. We've been there several times, so it's always a treat to come back.
And every time you do come back with your music, how do you arrange that to bring a different vibe than the previous show?
Well, we always try to change the set somewhat, and of course now, whenever there's a new project, a new release, we try to do, two or three things. I think we're doing three things from this new record. Not every show, but most shows. And then otherwise, it's just kind of a repertoire that everyone is so fond of. The audiences are so fond of and want to hear. So we try to play as many of those as we can, too. We always try to put a couple of newer ones in.
And off your 85 album, Skin Dive, you have a duet, Such a Great Love Story, featuring the voice of Brenda Russell. How did you come up with When I Give My Love to You?
Well, I loved Brenda. I visited some of her sessions on her first record, and we shared a producer at the time, Andre Fisher, who had produced a record for me, along with Tommy LuPuma. And I just thought she was the greatest and loved her songwriting and everything about her. So I was, it was always in the back of my mind to try to see if we could record a duet at some point. I wrote that song really with her in mind, and with her beautiful voice in mind. And fortunately, a lot of times you make those plans and they don't always fall into place. But fortunately, that one did.
Well, here's one for you to smile to. Here is Michael Franks featuring Brenda Russell, When I Give My Love to You, on FM 88.5 KSBR. That was Michael Franks featuring Brenda Russell, When I Give My Love to You. You can see him at the Long Beach Jazz Festival this Saturday. Now, when you begin your writing experience for a song, do you usually, is it accompanied by music, or is it more on personal, and then you translate that on the page?
I always start with the music first, and I find it's the only way I can actually do it. I know a lot of songwriters who, not a lot, but I know several songwriters who get ideas for lyrics first and write the lyrics down and then kind of hammer the music around that. But for me, for some reason, it's always been helpful to have. I make a very kind of casual demo at home. Lately, it's been using GarageBand. And in the old days, I used to do it in a much more complicated way with reel-to-reel tape and bouncing tracks around. But I always start with the music, and I usually have an idea for the song, for the title, or for some part of it. I usually have a couple of lyrical ideas in mind, but it's always been helpful to have this little demo that one you can refer to as you continue to write the lyrics. So that's the method I've always used.
And as an artist, how is it when you have, people such as the Crusaders and Patti Labelle, translate your music?
It's the greatest. It's absolutely the greatest. I've always been. It's much more gratifying, really, than your own records when somebody else records one of your tunes. It's just the ultimate compliment for a songwriter. And I have been so fortunate, and so blessed with all the great cover versions of tunes. I recently ran into an old friend of mine, Natalie Cole, who recorded one of my tunes a few years back called Tell Me All About It. And we were at a jazz festival in the Washington, D.C. area called the Capitol Jazz Fest, and I got to spend some time with Natalie, whom I had not seen for a long time. She did this beautiful sort of amazing scat thing at the end of the tune as the song kind of was beginning to fade. She did this really intricate kind of vocal arabesque kind of thing, with her, she's so talented. And, of course, I don't do any scat singing, really. I have one song called Scatsville where I do a, kind of a fake scat. And those kinds of singers, you mentioned Patti Labelle, and a lot of, it's a few good, really impressive instrumental versions by, jazz musicians, and of course you mentioned Joe Sample, and Al Jarreau sang one on Joe Sample record, and it's just, it's the ultimate compliment to have somebody else record it, and it's always enjoyable to hear what, how people interpret it.
When we come back, you will hear how an invitation from one of his heroes to Brazil took him to the Mount Rushmore of music. But first, here's Rendezvous in Rio on FM 88.5 KSBR. Another great song from Michael Franks on Jazz FM 88.5 KSBR. He will be performing this Saturday at the Long Beach Jazz Festival on the 13th. Michael, what are you looking forward to at this Saturday's performance?
Well, I can tell you from our point of view, we always have such a great time there. The audience is always so enthusiastic, and that's the greatest part for us. Just when you start a tune, everybody knows what it is, and if I have to be careful when I'm watching people in the audience, the people up close, because they're usually singing along, and if I don't concentrate, if I watch them too much, I kind of lose my place and in the vocals, so. But we always have a great time there.
Now, you did travel to South America, where you went to Rio de Janeiro to compose music. How has Brazil influenced your music?
I think it's had a tremendous influence on me. I started listening to Brazilian music when I was in college, and first heard the Get Gilberto record, which was a great introduction to the songs of Antonio Carlos Jobim, and then, you know, miraculously, I got to know Jobim somewhat, and actually it was he who invited us down to Rio and suggested we record down there. We went down, and I went down with my producer, Tommy LaPuma, and my engineer, Al Schmidt, two real, you know, faces on Mount Rushmore of music. And we went down and recorded, and I think we did about half the record down there, and Jobim kind of, you know, suggested players to us and suggested a studio, and subsequently I spent a little time with him. He used to come to New York and spend time in New York every New York summer, which was winter there. He would come up to New York, and he had a little sort of apartment he always stayed in, and I got to spend time with him. He wanted me to help work on some music he was writing, some really interesting music. I did collaborate on a few things with him. So it was just, you know, it was amazing to actually be, you know, in the presence of your, in the welcome, I guess, presence of one of your heroes, which he certainly was.
Wow, how wonderful. And still to this day, his son is in the music business, and you've had a chance to work with him as well.
Yes, I met Paolo. I met him the first time I went down there. I think he was probably 18 or so, maybe not even, when I first met him in the mid-'70s. And then I got to know him much better, and I always loved that particular song he wrote called Samba de Soho. And Astrid Gilberto had recorded it, and I just thought, gee, and I've been friends with Astrid for a long time, so I said, well, this is a tune I'd like to do. So I did get to record it on the last project, which was called Rendezvous in Rio.
Well, thank you, Michael Franks. Once again, Michael will be performing this Saturday at the annual Long Beach Jazz Festival for a night of great music and dancing. One I will leave you with is a tropical tune. Here is one of his favorites, Astrid Roberto, Michael Franks' version of Samba de Soho on FM 88.5 KSBR.